Niki Lauda almost became permanently disabled after his crash in 1976 Grand Prix. His medical condition was so bad that he was given his last rites while in hospital, but that didn't prevent him from coming back to F1 and winning multiple championships. From destroying everyone in the F1 immediately after his crash with no eyelids or eyebrows, to winning the F1 championship 8 years later while suffering from kidney issues, but things weren't always easy for him. His rivalry with James Hunt got him a lot of haters, and people didn't really like him. But it all started back on the 22nd of February 1949 in the town of Vienna, Austria. Niki's family was extremely wealthy due to their paper manufacturing plant. However, that doesn't mean he had it easy from the start, unlike other racers like Lewis Hamilton or Michael Schumacher, who were born to lower middle-class parents. His paternal grandfather, Hans Lauda, who was an Austrian industrialist, didn't really support Niki's decision to race in F1. Hans was critical of Niki's Formula One ambitions and said that a Lauda should be on the economic pages of the newspaper, not the sports pages. Even down the line, they never had a good relationship, with Hans vetoing funds for Niki to pay for a drive in the 1972 Formula One season, which led to Niki never talking to him again. Hans died shortly after, just 3 months before Niki's first actual victory in the Spanish Grand Prix of 1974. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's rewind a bit back to when Niki was just starting. If you're loving this documentary, make sure to subscribe as it helps me make more. Despite his family's disapproval, Niki started racing. He started his racing career with a relatively simple car because of the lack of funds. His first car was a Morris Mini, but he wasn't satisfied with how the car performed, so he quickly moved on to the Formula V, which is also known as the Formula Volkswagen. That was the current norm of Central Europe during that time, but Niki still wanted better cars, so he rapidly moved up to drive in private Porsche and Chevron sports cars. However, he then faced the biggest challenge of his life. No one was willing to sign him, even in Formula 2. This made Niki really sad, but he didn't let it stop his momentum because he took a £30,000 bank loan to pay as donations so that a team could hire him. That team being a fledgling F2 team from March Engineering. Niki was finally in the official racing leagues. He was happy even if he was under a lot of debt because he knew he could beat everyone, and his future was looking bright. But his family still didn't like Niki at all. They kept reminding him that they disapproved of his racing activities, which led to Niki abandoning all contact with his family. I guess it could be called a small price to pay for greatness. As for racing fans back then, it wasn't really uncommon for them to see a random rich kid behind the wheels of a racing car, which you could say still happens now. But what really shocked them and the March Engineering team was that the random rich kid could actually drive. March immediately promoted him to their official Formula One team, but he didn't stay there for long, mostly because the cars provided by March were really bad. It was so bad that during the 1972 Canadian Grand Prix, both March cars were disqualified within 3 laps. Lauda was talented, but he was stuck in the back of the pack. Then, in 1973, he made a risky move. He took out another loan and bought his way onto the BRM team. It wasn't a top team, but it was a step up, and that's when Lauda's career took off. At the 1973 Monaco Grand Prix, he finished 3rd. It wasn't a win, but in the world of F1, it was enough to turn heads. One of those heads? Enzo Ferrari. Yeah, that Ferrari. Ferrari offered Lauda a contract for 1974. Finally, Lauda had his shot at the big time. In his first year with Ferrari, he won 2 races and finished 4th in the championship. Not bad for a guy who was basically in debt up to his eyeballs a year earlier. 1975 was Lauda's year. He dominated the season, winning 5 races and securing his first world championship. As the 1976 season kicked off, Lauda was the man to beat. He won 4 of the first 6 races. It looked like he was cruising to another title. But then, we get to August 1st, 1976, the German Grand Prix at the Nürburgring, the D-Day. Nürburgring was a 14-mile monster that twisted through the Eiffel Mountains. They call it the Green Hell. Why? Because it was insanely dangerous. Narrow track, no runoff areas, and if you crashed in the woods, good luck getting help quickly. Lauda knew this. He wasn't just a speed demon, he was calculating. Before the race, he tried to organize a boycott. He thought the track was too dangerous, but most drivers voted to race. Some wanted to look brave. Others, as Lauda put it, were simply too stupid to know what they were doing. So the race went ahead, and on the second lap, Lauda's worst fears came true. His Ferrari Ferrari's rear suspension failed. The car slammed into an embankment, bounced back onto the track, and burst into flames. Lauda was trapped. Other drivers stopped to help. They pulled him from the wreckage, but not before he'd suffered severe burns to his head and inhaled toxic fumes that damaged his lungs. Lauda was rushed to the hospital. The doctors didn't think he'd survive the night. A priest gave him his last rites. But Niki Lauda wasn't done fighting. He slipped into a coma. Days passed. The racing world held its breath. Then, Lauda woke up. Half his face melted off, lungs scorched, hovering between life and death, and he's just worried about the damn championship. While he was fighting for his life, his rival James Hunt was racking up points. Hunt was everything Lauda wasn't. A party animal, a playboy, the kind of guy who claimed he had breakfast with sex. But make no mistake, Hunt was also a hell of a driver, and with Lauda out of commission, he was making up ground fast. Now, most people would have called it quits after an accident like Lauda's. Take the insurance money, maybe open a nice, safe car dealership. Not him. Just 6 weeks after his crash, 6 weeks, he was back in the race car. At the Italian Grand Prix, Lauda shows up. His head was still wrapped in bandages, blood seeping through the gauze. He could barely get his helmet on over the bandages. And what does he do? He finishes fourth place, 6 weeks after being given last rites. And the season wasn't even over. Far from it. As the final race approached, the Japanese Grand Prix, Lauda was still leading the championship, but only by 3 points over Hunt. It all came down to this. One race to decide it all. Race day arrived, and it was pouring rain. The track was dangerously wet. Lauda, the man who cheated death just weeks earlier, made a decision that would define his career. He took the lead early, but after 2 laps, he pulled into the pits and withdrew from the race. He later said, "My life is worth more than a title." Hunt needed to finish third or better to win the championship, and in a nail-biting finish, he did just that, securing 3rd place and the world title by a single point. Lauda could have been devastated. He'd fought so hard, come back from the brink of death, only to lose by 1 point. But the truth is, he wasn't, and that's perhaps the most surprising part. He later said he was glad Hunt won, saying, "We were big rivals, but we respected each other." That mutual respect between Lauda and Hunt is something special. 2 guys with completely different personalities, fighting tooth and nail on the track, but friends off it. Sure, some called Niki a coward, but he didn't care. He had looked death in the face and made a calculated decision. It was the same analytical approach that had made him a champion, and it would make him a champion again. Hunt said after winning the title, "I feel I should apologize to Niki. This race was run in ridiculous conditions, and I fully understand and support his decision to withdraw." But apologies weren't necessary. Niki Lauda wasn't finished, not yet. He came back in 1977 with a vengeance. He won his 2nd world championship that year, proving to everyone, and maybe to himself, that the accident hadn't broken him. But then something happened. Niki took full credit for the team's victory and demanded a raise, but Ferrari refused to give it to him. The solution? Both Ferrari and Lauda called it quits, right in the middle of the Canadian Grand Prix competition. He didn't even show up for the trials. In a way, he was done with F1. But 2 years later, the itch came back. Lauda returned to F1 in 1982 with McLaren, and in 1984, at the ripe old age of 35, ancient by F1 standards, he won his 3rd world championship. Yes, the same guy that nearly died in 1976, had half of his face reconstructed, missed 2 races, and still almost won the championship that year. Then he went on to win 2 more titles, including one in his mid-30s. Lauda's story is more than just about racing. It's about resilience, about staring death in the face and saying, "Not today." After retiring for good in 1985, Lauda didn't just fade away. He became a successful airline entrepreneur, founding and running several airlines. He also stayed involved in F1, taking on management roles with Ferrari and Mercedes. But perhaps his most important legacy was his push for improved safety in F1. After his accident, Lauda became a vocal advocate for better safety measures. He knew firsthand the cost of racing on dangerous tracks with inadequate safety protocols. Thanks in part to Lauda's efforts, F1 became significantly safer in the decades that followed. The sport will always be dangerous. That's part of its appeal, but thanks to Lauda and others like him, drivers today have a much better chance of walking away from crashes that would have been fatal in the past. In the end, that was his legacy, being smart, careful, and calculated. Well, they didn't call him the computer for nothing. Lauda had an almost supernatural ability to understand his car. He could feel every vibration, hear every off-key note from the engine. He worked closely with his mechanics, providing detailed feedback that helped them fine-tune the car to perfection. This attention to detail, this obsession with understanding every aspect of his craft, is what paid off. 3 world championships, 25 race wins, 54 podium finishes. Lauda's record speaks for itself. From that fiery wreck at the Nürburgring to his final championship victory, Lauda showed us what it means to never give up, to always push forward no matter the odds, even after F1, because life doesn't always get easier. The injuries from his 1976 crash lingered. He underwent 2 kidney transplants, the second donated by his wife, Birgit, a former flight attendant for his airline. In his later years, health issues continued to plague him. In August 2018, he underwent a lung transplant. In January 2019, Niki spent 10 days in the hospital with influenza. His body, which had endured so much, was growing weaker. On May 20th, 2019, Niki Lauda passed away peacefully in his sleep. He was 70 years old. The world mourned, not just for a great racing driver, but for a man who embodied determination, courage, and an unbreakable will to succeed. We remember Niki Lauda with respect and admiration for his skill behind the wheel, yes, but more importantly for his character, his unflinching honesty, his relentless pursuit of excellence, and his courage in the face of unimaginable adversity. On August 1st, 1976, in the Nürburgring circuit in Germany, a Ferrari Formula One car slammed into the barriers at high speed, erupting into a fireball. Many thought this was the end of Niki Lauda's story, but it was just the beginning. From the ashes of that fiery crash, Niki Lauda rose, 3-time Formula One world champion, survivor, legend, a man who truly lived life in the fast lane and won.